going to be a number of weeks or months between flights of the same booster, and we'll see how that affects the launch rate as well. SpaceX wants to fly up to 25 test flights of Starship this year. I think that's going to be an aspirational goal, but certainly I think there's a really good chance of having SpaceX fly many more times than they did last year. Double or more would be my guess for their cadence in 2025 for these test flights. And but getting the second launch tower online is required for these lunar missions because they'll have to be launching, depending on who you ask, 10-ish, maybe a few less, a few more tanker missions to refuel Starship to go to the moon. And that will require 2 launch pads or more in operation.
Yeah, and we've seen out here at the Kennedy Space Center at Pad 39A, they've actually been driving in what appears to be some pilings in support of what could be either the landing zone for the Falcon rocket or potentially the second tower out at Pad 39A. So lots of activity in support of the Starship program in full swing out here as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And there are currently plans that we know of for 4 Starship launch pads, 2 that you're seeing here in Texas, 2 on Florida Space Coast, 1 on NASA property, 1 on Space Force property, and with 4 active launch pads, that's going to enable certainly daily, in terms of just capacity, daily or more, even more rapid flights of Starship in the years ahead. But I think we're seeing that, on the right here, you're seeing launch tower number 2 at Starbase. That looks like, the tower is constructed. There's still some outfitting and dirt work going on around the launch mount, and to, install the arms and get those ready to go. So I think there's a good chance, though, of Tower 2 being ready to go this year. But the launch towers down in Florida are probably still a year or 2 away at best.
Yeah, it seems like they've been doing quite a bit of work off and on the first tower that's been out here. It seems to have quieted down, at least for now. Of course, just saw launch number 100 from the currently active part of Launch Complex 39A with the flight of a pair of moon-bound lunar landers, one for Texas-based Firefly Aerospace with their Blue Ghost lunar lander, one for Japan-based iSpace and their Resilience lander, which I know you just did some reporting on as well. Both those missions made contact with their landers and beginning very different trajectories to the moon. So it's really been quite an impactful and exciting week in commercial spaceflight, given where we started with the Starlink launch, missions to the moon, 131 payloads on Transporter 12, New Glenn, and now Starship.
Yeah, it's certainly been an exciting opening month, or opening 2 weeks to 2025. And I'll add a few more. There's India Space Agency just executed their first docking in space, which is going to be critical for their human spaceflight program. And I think we're just a couple of days away from seeing China, one of their state-owned aerospace companies, attempting a 75-kilometer hop of a reusable rocket prototype, which is going to be really impressive to see, a methane-fueled rocket that's going to lay the groundwork for their reusable rockets.
Yeah, a lot of really exciting advancements. Thank you for bringing up both China and India, since they're obviously putting a lot of time and investment into building up their both commercial and government-based space programs. So it's a lot to cover, certainly, for those of us in the space press corps, if you will, but never a dull moment. Certainly, you'd be hard pressed to find a week or even a day where there's, a quote unquote slow news day. I mean, you really just have to look in the right direction and you've got something to write about, whether it's commercial development or even just now 2 days ago, some of the forward sections of the boosters that'll support the Artemis II Space Launch System rocket were rolled over to the vehicle assembly building.
Yeah, certainly. Well, there's no shortage of activity going on at spaceports and factories in the halls of Washington, D.C., all around the world. There's space news happening every day. And I liken it to, I've been covering space for the better part of 20 years now. And I liken it to like triage in a hospital. You have so many stories instead of patients obviously coming in, and you have to prioritize them and do that in terms of what's most important, what's most impactful, what's new, what's interesting. So it's a constant process of evaluating what to cover.
Speaking of constant updates, and you mentioned Capitol Hill, so I'll use this as an opportunity for a segue. Also note that we are now less than 2 hours, once again, to the planned liftoff of Starship Flight 7. Obviously, we are just a handful of days away now from a new administration coming in. The confirmation process has already begun on Capitol Hill. A couple of folks have already gone through their Senate confirmation hearings. Someone who obviously is close to our beat that is going to be going through that process, who we've both had the opportunity to speak with, is, of course, Jared Isaacman, the commander of Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn, businessman, owner of Shift 4 Payments, who will step down upon being confirmed. Don't believe we actually had a chance to really talk about his nod for the NASA administrator role, but want to get your thoughts on that and the greater context of what we've been talking about now, given the ever increasing drumbeat of commercial space activity here in the United States and beyond.
Yeah, I think Jared Isaacman is obviously a huge proponent and evangelist for commercial spaceflight. He's flown on 2 missions to low Earth orbit himself as a commercial astronaut, and so he's the world's most, well, depending on how you weigh it, he's the world's most experienced commercial astronaut. Of course, we've seen some former NASA astronauts fly commercially as well, but he obviously has his foot toe in the water in that market, in that segment of the space industry. So he knows what capabilities are out there, what's emerging. And I think in the early days of the administration, or certainly after he gets confirmed, and I haven't heard a date for his confirmation hearing yet. I don't think it's going to happen, obviously, before Inauguration Day, but potentially in the weeks ahead. It'll be really interesting to hear the questions directed toward him from the Senate Commerce Committee, and hear what he has planned or his priorities for NASA. And I think there are changes going to be afoot in NASA, particularly in their human spaceflight program. I think the Artemis program obviously is going to continue to be a priority for NASA, returning humans to the moon, looking at going to Mars. But how they do it, I think, has a high chance of changing under this new administration. And I think commercial companies are going to play a larger role. Now, what that means for the Space Launch System or the Orion spacecraft, I think, is still to be determined. I think there is an appetite to significantly change or even cancel those programs, particularly the Space Launch System, among the incoming administration. But Congress, of course, will have something to say about that. So we'll see how all that shakes out. And I think that's going to be one of the big stories to follow in 2025.
Yeah, of course, we're, long since past, I mean, not too terribly long, but we are certainly beyond the point in which former Senator Richard Shelby from the state of Alabama wielded quite a bit of power and influence to enact the staying power of the Space Launch System rockets. So without sort of big heavy hitters like him in a political sense, it'll be interesting to see what those conversations are like, and to your point, what the confirmation conversation turns to in the line of questioning, specifically from those senators who are not in states that have either NASA installation or are not states like Texas, Florida, or California, where SpaceX has a very specific and pronounced presence.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. There are lots of storylines to follow. My colleague Eric Berger wrote a story shortly before the holidays, discussing some of the things that he's hearing from sources about some of the proposals that may be coming in under the new administration. And the Marshall Space Flight Center is where the Space Launch System program is headquartered, and there are numerous hundreds or thousands of jobs there that are tied to the Space Launch System program. And you mentioned former Senator Richard Shelby. Of course, he was a stalwart supporter of the Space Launch System to protect those jobs and the economic impact that they bring to his state. He is now retired, of course, and there's no leadership from Alabama on the committees that would have input on these policy changes. Of course, there are members of the committees from Alabama, though, who would have something to say, I'm sure. But some of the proposals that Eric Berger reported on last month, would involve relocating some NASA activity, other NASA programs to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama that could offset some job losses that would be uh, a result of the cancellation of the Space Launch System. And of course, President-elect Trump is keen on attempting to relocate the headquarters of U.S. Space Command from Colorado Springs to Huntsville, Alabama. That could offset some of the jobs. So there could be some kind of deal made between the incoming administration and a bipartisan group of lawmakers to potentially offset any job losses or economic impact that would be a result of the cancellation of the Space Launch System to Alabama. There are other places around the country, though, that would have impacts. One that comes to mind would be the New Orleans area, where the core stage for the Space Launch System is built, and of course Utah, where the solid rocket boosters for the Space Launch System are manufactured. So there are other states that would have, impacts from a cancellation that the offsets wouldn't be so clear. So it's going to be an interesting play on Capitol Hill.
Well, and certainly just thinking about the southern United States, you mentioned Louisiana and the Michoud Assembly Facility. Not too far down the road, though, is also the Stennis Space Center, where they do have a number of commercial customers who have access to the test stands, but obviously losing the ability to continue testing the RS-25 engines, and eventually when they get the if it's not canceled before then the exploration upper stage, NASA has a plan to do a full green run test of that, like they did with the first core stage of the SLS rocket. So that would be a big impact to the Louisiana, Mississippi space part of their economy as well, and the jobs that support that. Also note that while not a senator, of course, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has also weighed in the conversation about moving various NASA assets and made an overture for NASA HQ to move down here to the Sunshine State. So it'll be interesting to see who ultimately has the final ear of both the president, as well as when it comes to appropriations, how those chips fall with all these folks that are wanting to decentralize NASA in various forms and facets, and what ultimately wins the day.
Yeah, like in so many cases in politics, it's hard to separate the rhetoric from reality or real proposal that someone has. So I'm sure some of the things that have been mentioned, have been floated and perhaps already rejected or will be rejected by Congress. Other things that have been proposed will be enacted, and so don't take all of these ideas and all of these proposals that the incoming administration is floating right now don't take those to the bank, because the administration's priorities could change and Congress has not weighed in at this point. So there's still a long way to go.
And miles to go. Certainly the case. Want to take a look at some of the questions that we're getting in here, as we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 49 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. Also want to thank all of those who are currently watching both of the live streams, either with Lab Padre or with Spaceflight Now. If you haven't already, you could do us both a big favor just by clicking the like button. It allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage with our special guest, Mr. Stephen Clark from Ars Technica. Did have a question that I wanted to go to. This one coming from the Lab Padre stream, asking, A simple question, but an impactful one potentially to any launch is, how's the wind out there? Spaceflight now photographer Adam Bernstein, who is over at South Padre Island. Let's see if we can go to his camera view right here, give you a sense of what he's looking at. That's Adam's tracker view right now. You can see it's a little bit hazy down low. Pull back out to the higher roof view. You can see sort of what he's shooting into, that level of haze, a little bit of fog perhaps out there. He reports that it is breezy with some notable gusts that are popping up from time to time. Obviously not exactly the same as it is down there at the pad, but given the elevated position, that'll be, something, of course, that SpaceX will be looking at with the upper level winds with their Starship rocket. Unfortunately, they have not published, to my knowledge, and Stephen, correct me if you've heard to the contrary, any information about the upper level wind limits of this version of Starship.
No, Will, I have not. And I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is a lot of those variables depend on direction of the wind and the shear of the wind at the upper levels of the atmosphere. It's not just the number or the speed of the wind at a certain altitude; it's the change in wind speed or direction at different altitudes as the rocket climbs up through the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's all very good, very relevant points about direction and shear.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no set number. It all depends on the factors on the day of launch.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to now that I'm trying to recall it, spacing on the flight. I want to say it was maybe Crew 9 when SpaceX did a static fire test out at Space Launch Complex 40, and just because of the direction of the wind, it happened to kick back some of the plume and get a little bit of soot on the Crew Dragon that had to be cleaned off before they were ready to go fly it. So, the wind direction is definitely something that can sneak up on you in some curious ways.
Exactly. And another factor that depends on wind direction are the toxic and debris dispersions that would result from an explosion or a catastrophic failure during launch. There are some limitations if the winds are from a certain direction or at a certain speed from that direction of areas that maybe need to be evacuated, or in some cases the launch would not be a go if the toxic debris from a launch from toxic propellant or even large chunks of the vehicle have a chance of being blown by the wind into a built up or populated area.
Precisely. Speaking of environmental impacts and space flight, of course, you had mentioned earlier in our conversation the desire for SpaceX to get up to 25 liftoffs and landings of both the Super Heavy booster and the ship upper stage. Of course, we're not quite at the point where SpaceX is ready to catch the ship, but that is the plan to start that some point later this year, potentially as early as Flight 8. In fact, there was some public scoping and public meetings that just wrapped up, I believe, last week to get some of the community's input on an increased flight rate down here at Starbase. Obviously important for SpaceX and its business, as well as we've been talking about with NASA and the human landing system part for the Artemis program as it currently exists. Stephen, I guess the question to you would be, do you foresee any grand hiccup that would come from public comment that would potentially stymie SpaceX ramping up the flight rate here at Starbase?
Yeah, not that I've heard, Will. I was not able to participate or attend any of those meetings last week in person or virtually, so I don't know if I have anything to report specifically from those meetings that any comments that came about from those engagements with the local community. But I'm not aware of anything specific, and I think, you know, with the incoming administration, they're going to have a different approach to federal regulations. So I would not expect any significant roadblocks to a final approval of 25 flights per year of Starship. And let's keep in mind, a year or two from now, that 25 flights, if SpaceX is ramping up their cadence as they hope to, will have to be reevaluated for perhaps 100 missions or even more. So it's going to be a continuous change. Just as SpaceX iterates on Starship, the FAA and regulators are going to have to iterate on their regulations and licensing process through this whole process, because the parameters are going to be changing very, very quickly.
Well, and of course, it's not just SpaceX pushing for a greater cadence with Starship, but the Falcon 9 rocket, of course, they had a bump up to 50 flights at Vandenberg. And in fact, right now they're in the process of going through the environmental impact statement authorization for Pad 6 or Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg that would authorize not only Falcon 9, but Falcon Heavy flights from there. And the Federal Aviation Administration noting, as well as Vandenberg Space Force Base, that obviously when bringing a new pad online, there's the direct implication that that would increase the flight cadence beyond just what SpaceX wants to do at Slick 4. So it's quite a dramatic change for regulators both across the board and across the country right now.
Yep, you're right. And apart from environmental impacts, which have gotten a lot of pushback and criticism from Elon Musk and some others in the space community and in politics, there's also the question of how do you integrate all of these launches, all of these reentries going forward with Starship and other commercial rockets with the national airspace, with air traffic. And the areas of airspace that have to be closed for a launch are shrinking because it's just not practical to close off, a full area of the ocean from air traffic, especially around cities like off the coast of Florida. There's routes going into Orlando or Miami that use that airspace over Cape Canaveral and just offshore every day, every hour of every day, really. And the same is the case to a lesser degree near Vandenberg Space Force Base for the air traffic, and even to a lesser degree, although there's still commercial air traffic flying over Starbase, particularly on routes coming in and out of Mexico to the United States and to Europe. Many flights over Starbase every day, in addition to the local air traffic.
Before we pivot entirely off of this, just for those who may be in the Southern Central California area that want to lend your voice to the Starship, or excuse me, to the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy flights from Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg, there are still two more public meetings. There's one more in person that's actually happening later on today at the Dick DeWeese Community Center in Lompoc, California. That's from 5 to 8 p.m. Pacific. And then there's a virtual public scoping meeting for anyone to participate in, no matter whether you're there in California or elsewhere. That's coming up a week from today on Thursday, January 23rd, barring any additional delays on that. Also, just to make this not an entirely SpaceX-centric discussion of the impacts of launch, of course, you've also got, as we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 39 minutes, 30 seconds and counting to the lift of Starship, more folks looking to fly from Wallops Island, Virginia. Obviously, there's the upcoming launch of Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket, which is going to be lifting off from, I believe, Launch Complex 0. Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But you've also got Firefly Aerospace, which currently launches its Alpha rocket from down at Vandenberg currently, but they're also looking to launch from Wallops as well, since things are getting so congested at the Cape. They're looking farther north. So the Virginia area is going to be getting quite a bit of impact and need to consider how to manage that.
Yeah, and of course, Virginia is, Wallops Island there on the eastern shore, another, going back to my previous point about airspace, another very heavily trafficked region for flights. going up and down the eastern seaboard. So I think that's something that's kind of worth following or worth covering this year. Is I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. A good story would be how all this volume of rocket launches, how it could affect air traffic, and how the FAA is going to mitigate that, because a lot of like I said, there's been a lot of criticism, whether it's founded or unfounded, about the way the FAA has gone about some of their environmental reviews. But I think the impacts on air traffic, commercial air traffic, and general aviation is something else, and it's kind of a serious thing that needs to be examined.
Absolutely. That's actually a good your thinking out loud comment made me want to think to ask our audience, whether you're watching on the Spaceflight Now side of things or over on Lab Padre. Go ahead and jump in the live chat of whatever stream you're watching in. Let us know, as we're still in the very, very early part of 2025, what are some of the big space stories that you think will make headlines this year, as a part one of my question to our audience. But part two, you've got Stephen Clark with Ars Technica, you've got Lab Padre and Spaceflight Now. What are some of the things that you'd like to see us cover this year, as far as reporting topics or things to really dive into, whether that's on the realm of more government side and commercial space flight, human space flight, satellite missions, interplanetary goings on? Sound off in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Now, T-minus 1 hour, 36 minutes, 14 seconds and counting to liftoff of Flight 7 of Starship. T-minus 1 hour, 35 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. As we've been talking about, this week has been a blistering pace of commercial and government space activity, and sometimes the combination of the two. On Wednesday at 1:11 a.m. back here in Florida, we saw the liftoff of SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with 2 robotic landers on board. One from Texas-based Firefly Aerospace, their Blue Ghost lunar lander, for their first mission as part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. The other from Japan-based iSpace. I want to stay on the topic of clips for a moment. We had the opportunity prior to the launch to talk with a number of folks about the mission, things coming up for the CLIPS program. And one of the points of conversation that happened to turn to when talking with NASA's Joel Kearns, who is the Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration within NASA's Science Mission Directorate, was looking at the various CLIPS providers. One of those is actually SpaceX with its Starship rocket. Currently hasn't been assigned a CLIPS mission just yet, but I asked Joel if that is in the works, or what NASA is thinking about bringing SpaceX into one of those contract assignments, flying some NASA science on board Starship, in addition, of course, to seeing it develop as part of the Human Landing System program. So want to go to a part of that conversation now. Once again, this is Dr. Joel Kearns Deputy Associate Administrator for Exploration with NASA's Science Mission Directorate.
Well, SpaceX is a CLIPS company. SpaceX is one of the 14 companies in CLIPS, but SpaceX is very focused on Starship. For both providing the Starship version for human landing system and also for their own corporate goals with Starship. So I'm sure once it's better understood what the real technical capabilities of the costs are in Starship, I really wouldn't be surprised if SpaceX had some ideas on how to bring CLIPS-type cargo to the moon once they have that all proved out.
So, Stephen, want to bring you back in to talk about that idea. We've seen a number of, well, now 3 CLIPS providers launch their attempts to reach the moon. One unsuccessful, one largely successful, although had a bit of a bumpy landing, and TBD with Firefly Aerospace. Your thoughts on this massive rocket that we see before us, potentially bringing various types of CLIPS style science to the moon?
I think the let your imagination run wild there, Will, because it could pretty much carry any of these science payloads that NASA has in mind to put on a CLIPS lander. And in fact, it could, I'm not sure how it could deliver different landers to different parts of the moon, although point-to-point transportation has been discussed as a potential application for Starship on Earth. But this thing can carry multiple CLIPS landers from the other companies inside its payload compartment and drop them off at different places on the moon. Again, thinking out loud here, so I don't know how fanciful that idea is, but that's gives you an idea of the scale of Starship compared to these other landers. It can carry, theoretically 100 metric tons of payload to the moon, and that's a remarkable amount of capacity that a lot of scientists and engineers who want to gather data or test something on the moon could utilize. And like Joel said, they are a CLIPS provider. They are eligible to bid on these CLIPS task orders or contracts. I'm not sure if they have yet, actually. I don't think they have, if I had to bet, but I don't know that for sure. But we've seen all the CLIPS task orders go to a handful of companies so far: Intuitive Machines, Firefly Aerospace, Astrobotic, and I think one to Draper, which is partnering with iSpace, who also launched their second lunar lander earlier this week as well. So those companies kind of are emerging as the leaders of the pack in the CLIPS realm.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the others come into play. Of course, one that Joel mentioned in our conversation, not in that clip in particular, was that Blue Origin and its Blue Moon lunar lander in the cargo variant will be, or has actually won a CLIPS contract award, so it'll be flying some NASA science to the moon when it makes its uncrewed landing demonstration. And I asked him as well if, thinking about Starship making its own uncrewed landing demonstration, if the Science Mission Directorate is planning on adding some science instruments on board that flight, since it would seem, in my mind, to make sense if you're going to go ahead and send an uncrewed Starship to the moon anyway, why not add in a couple of, CLIPS payloads, since the whole goal of the program is to create these higher risk tolerant opportunities to go to the moon, recognizing that, not all of them are going to succeed, that you're going to have varying outcomes, that if you need it to work super well for the human version of Starship, that you could fly some science as well. And he said that those discussions are ongoing right now, but they haven't, to your point, it sounds like, made a firm decision to tack on an instrument or two just yet.
Yeah, I agree. Why not? If the ship's already going to the moon for this uncrewed demo, I think that's a good idea, and I think that's something NASA will consider as that flight gets closer to launch. And just one more thing on CLIPS while I'm thinking about it. The CLIPS program started back in 2018, and you mentioned the entire premise for the program is to create what I've heard called shots on goal, to use like a hockey or a soccer or football term. And accepting higher risk for these missions, knowing that not every one of them is going to succeed. And I think the former, if I remember his quote correctly, former NASA science chief Thomas Zurbuchen, told me that he thought these early CLIPS missions each would have a 50-50 chance of success, and that's exactly what has happened so far with 2 missions by Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines. One of them failed to reach the moon. One of them did make a soft landing on the moon, although it did tip over, but it was still the first controlled landing on the moon, soft landing on the moon, by the United States since 1972. So still a remarkable achievement. I think this year, with those 2 missions now complete, with Firefly on the way to the moon, with Intuitive Machines launching their second mission next month. iSpace is not, this mission is not part of the CLIPS program, but they are part of the CLIPS family. So it'll be interesting to watch how that mission goes with their Resilience lander that launched in tandem with Firefly's Blue Ghost earlier this week. Those missions aren't going to be getting to the moon till, in Firefly's case, March, and I think a couple of months later for iSpace. These 3 missions all launching to the moon within a few weeks of each other. I think there's, NASA talks about accepting risk and risk of failure, risk of not reaching the moon, but I think there's a lot of maybe implied pressure or anxiety about these 3 missions. At least I think NASA's going to want to see 1 or 2 of them at least have a successful landing and be able to operate on the moon as intended and collect science data in order to prove out the CLIPS concept and gain support for that both politically and from commercial companies going forward.
Well, and to that point is where T-minus 1 hour, 26 minutes, 43 seconds and counting to liftoff of Starship Flight 7. From just a scientific, accomplishment perspective, you're going to want to have the ability to say, hey, I want to study this very specific part of the moon. And so I need, not just to be in the general ballpark, but to, give me like within a 50-meter, bubble for the landing. So, the level of precision for these landers is, going to have to get better in order to meet the expected outcome from science and research institutions that are coming down the road. One other thing just in the realm of iSpace and its partnership with the CLIPS program. iSpace, for the general audience who's unfamiliar with that company, has 3 different bases of operations. Sort of the main one when you think of iSpace that is headquartered in Japan. They're the ones behind the Resilience rover that you just saw launch on Wednesday. iSpace US is the part of the company that is going to be developing the lander in partnership with Draper as a part of the CLIPS program. And then, iSpace Europe develops the rovers that fly on these various missions. So for those who are watching coverage or read a little bit about the mission launching to the moon, or that is on the way to the moon right now, there's a little Tenacity micro rover that is flying with a number of science instruments on board. That's coming from Europe. And so, yeah, lots of global puzzle pieces around here, but just to give folks that little bit of extra context.
Yes, good context. And it's, iSpace is a startup. It's only been around for a few years, but they're a global company. And iSpace US is led by Ron Guerin, who is a former NASA astronaut, and Draper, who is one of the CLIPS providers that NASA has in, among their companies that they've selected to be eligible for CLIPS missions. Draper, on its own has gone to iSpace, and iSpace is essentially a subcontractor to Draper. So Draper will operate and manage the mission. iSpace will build the lander for that CLIPS mission going forward. So as I said, iSpace, this mission that launched earlier this week that iSpace is sending is a fully commercial mission, but they are part of the CLIPS family, and NASA will be interested in how that mission goes. And I think there are 13 or 14 of these CLIPS companies that NASA has selected to be eligible for these contracts and these task orders. And we've only seen NASA go out and award actual contracts and firm mission orders to, 5 at this point, if you count Blue Origin. And, much like we've seen in other segments of the industry, launch comes to mind. starts out with many of these startups with an idea or concept or a PowerPoint or some hardware testing, but only a few are going to float to the top and emerge as leaders. And I think the same thing is going to happen with clips. You're going to see 2 or 3 or 4 of these companies be reliable, regular providers, and the others either won't make it or will exit the market.
Yeah, and I was just looking up some of the upcoming CLIPS missions and the ones that have been awarded. Looks like Intuitive Machines has 4 on the books right now. Firefly has 3. You've got the Draper iSpace combo with the Apex 1 lander, and then the Mark 1 lunar lander from Blue Origin, that is their Blue Moon Mark 1, that's going to be heading to the lunar South Pole when it makes that uncrewed landing demonstration. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 22 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. Just for a little point in time reference of where we are, we're less than 10 minutes away from the point at which the SpaceX launch director is set to take that poll and verify that they are go for the start of prop load today. You can see a number of boats going in and out of the canal there. Obviously, a lot of folks looking for as good a vantage points as they possibly can to catch this flight of Starship when it does make its ascent off of pad 1 there. Talking a little bit more specifically about the mission here, Stephen. I mean, we could hit a number of aspects, but let's just start with the catch. Speaking of batting, 500 or a 50% success rate, they hit the mark on the first time with Flight 5. They had to divert because of some damaged sensors on the tower during the launch of Flight 6. In their description of the mission that is about to happen in less than an hour and a half, they did talk about adding in some additional hardware to protect those sensors and make them a little bit more resilient. Not that you have a crystal ball right in front of you or a magic 8-ball, but given what we know about where they are with those developments, how confident or not are you feeling in a successful catch of the Super Heavy booster this go around?
Pretty high. I think a pretty high chance of a catch on this attempt. We saw the first catch in October. We learned later that there was a technical issue or concern with I think one of the engines or on the Super Heavy booster that almost caused a divert for that, but it ended up working. That was a remarkable thing to witness. You and I were both there to see it in person. Something I don't think either one of us will ever forget seeing and witnessing. And in November on Flight 6, the booster was completely healthy, and you mentioned the sensors on the tower were damaged during the launch, which is why the booster had to divert out to sea. So that gives me a healthy degree of confidence that the booster will be able to make an attempt for the catch on this mission. And obviously SpaceX is confident if they don't have to divert of a successful catch, because we talked a lot about this in October before the first catch attempt, that if something happened, something went wrong during the catch, it could damage the tower, damage the launch pad. That would require months potentially of rework and repairs, and create a gap in launches and downtime that SpaceX nor NASA really want right now, with so much relying on Starship for the human return to the moon. So that's something that's still in the back of my mind. To be honest, it hasn't been talked about a lot since SpaceX accomplished it successfully back in October. But if something does go wrong, it does damage the launch pad, what impacts does that create going forward? But I'm fairly confident that there won't be a need for a divert today. And if they don't divert, I have a high degree of confidence that they will catch it.
Well, to your point, it was certainly an unforgettable experience to see that first historic catch on their first attempt. Definitely blazoned on my mind, and was quite a moment. I'm glad we were able to share that down in southern Texas, just a few miles away from the pad. And we'll have Stephen come back and join us a little bit later on in the broadcast. Stephen Clark, reporter with Ars Technica. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 18 minutes and 18 seconds to go, as we are just about 3 minutes away from the point in which the SpaceX flight director set to conduct that readiness poll for the start of prop load today. Given that SpaceX had to cycle back to the beginning or to a new T0, make that adjustment, I know there's quite a number of folks who were here now that were not here with us when we started the broadcast. So let's go back just a little bit and talk about the countdown timeline to let folks know where we are about to go under a nominal countdown scenario. Didn't mean to rhyme that much, but here we are. That poll on the start of prop load, that readiness, set to be taken at T-minus 1 hour, 15 minutes, and that's followed up by the start of fueling, with liquid oxygen being flown on board the ship LOX tanks. Ship upper stage will then receive its fuel, that liquid methane, starting at the T-minus 43 minute mark. T-minus 41 minutes, 24 seconds, booster fuel load begins. Last fueling milestone to start is the LOX on the booster. That will get underway at T-minus 35 minutes and 38 seconds. Not a ton of change in this fueling process, although an important switch that we see from Flight 6 to Flight 7 last go around. They started with the ship fuel, that liquid methane, around T-minus 49 minutes and some change. And then they went to begin loading liquid oxygen. As you see here, though, they have inverted those as far as the order and also reduced the timing. So now we're actually much closer as far as overall fueling timelines to something that we would see with a Falcon Heavy rocket out here in Florida. The engine chill for the Raptor engines on both the booster and the ship upper stage get underway at the T-minus 19 minute 40 second mark. Fast forward to T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Prop load on the ship upper stage wraps up. That's followed 30 seconds after that by prop load on the booster. At that point, the Starship rocket is fully loaded and ready to go. In the final 30 seconds, the SpaceX flight director will give their go for launch. The flame deflector is activated in the final 10 seconds of the count. The Raptor ignition sequence begins at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 33 Raptor engines ignite and are healthy, or even if some of them don't ignite, well, as SpaceX likes to say, excitement is guaranteed. And we'll hopefully see a good liftoff of this fully integrated Starship stack coming up here at in 1 hour, 14 minutes, 38 seconds. So at this point, SpaceX should have made the call on the start of prop load today, targeting a T0 liftoff at 4:37 p.m. Central, 5:37 p.m. Eastern, 22:37 UTC. the webcast from SpaceX is not expected to begin until about the final 35 minutes before liftoff, at which point we'll be able to bring in those additional views coming in from SpaceX. Echoing the super chat comment that we have here from Well Reasoned. If you haven't already, you could do a big favor to both of these channels in the live streams, Lab Padre and Spaceflight Now, by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue on through the countdown towards Starship Flight 7. Time now T-minus 1 hour, 11 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. We are starting to see some prominent venting coming from the launch tower there. The first part of the fueling process getting underway, but a good indication that the go-ahead was given for the start of prop load, which will begin at the T-minus 45 minute 54 second mark with ship liquid oxygen load. This vent somewhat reminiscent of what we see down here at Cape Canaveral or the Kennedy Space Center with the so-called big vent, as the feed lines are being conditioned prior to second stage liquid oxygen load on a Falcon 9 rocket. Similar process be happening here, conditioning the lines prior to loading that locks on the ship upper stage. A few minutes after that, liquid methane will also start flowing on board the ship upper stage, S-33. Time now T minus 1 hour, 6 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. One of our spaceflight now photographers, Adam Bernstein's been down at Starbase helping to support our coverage of this upcoming liftoff of Starship for Flight 7. I want to take a look at one of the photos that he captured when cruising around Starbase. Taking a look at the forward flaps on the ship upper stage and a couple of SpaceX workers you see there on the bucket lift. That's just off of the side of the right-hand flap. A couple of nice details you can see in this image. An homage to the Dragon program you see just next to the hinge, not at the bottom, but right in the middle of each of the flaps, a little decal for a Dragon spacecraft. Potentially one as a nod to the Cargo Dragon program, another to the Crew Dragon program. And an acknowledgement that future versions of Starship will be able to take on capabilities from potentially both. As we've been talking about with Stephen, the version 3 or block 3 version of Starship will likely be the one, or if not that, block 4 that will be able to carry large payloads and humans on board in various iterations. SpaceX also made a point to redesign these forward flaps, a little bit of a different design than what we saw during the previous flights of Starship, part of its block upgrade. These flaps reduced in size and move forward on the vehicle, have slightly different tilt as well, which SpaceX says, quote, significantly reduces their exposure to reentry heating while simplifying the underlying mechanics and protective tiling, end quote. And while this Block 2 Starship is not going to be sending payload to orbit, it does have some payloads inside. Taking a look at another photo from our Adam Bernstein, looking at the payload bay door, what SpaceX likes to refer to as the PEZ dispenser. Little Mechazilla decal off to the right of that. But SpaceX has 10 of the so-called Starlink simulators on board, which are similar in size and weight as the version 3 edition of the Starlink satellites will be. They will follow the same flight path as the ship upper stage once it separates and begins its flight path. These simulators will splash down in the waters of the Indian Ocean as well, similar to ship. So they will not go into orbit. Again, this is one of the things that SpaceX is looking to demonstrate on this flight. That payload deploy demonstration scheduled to take place at T plus 17 minutes and 33 seconds into flight. That'll be followed by a Raptor in space relight demonstration as well. That's coming up about 20 minutes after the payload deploy demo. Time now T minus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. Do you have an update from SpaceX that the team is go for prop load? Once again, propellant load on the Starship fully integrated stack will start at T minus 45 minutes, 54 seconds with liquid oxygen flowing on board the ship upper stage. Time now T minus 59 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Want to address a question via Super Chat to the Lab Padre stream from Andy Alder, asking what day slash time slash day locally will ship be splashing down. As far as the day, it'll be January 17th, so Friday, when it splashes down. Roughly, it'll be about 9:40 something. Yeah, about 9:43 a.m. locally is, if I'm doing my time conversion correctly, that's about when ship will be splashing down in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Question from the Rocket Girl asking, what are the chances there's a scrub on tonight's launch attempt? Well, weather is looking pretty good. Teams have pulled go for prop load, which is about to begin here in roughly 20 minutes. SpaceX does have a 60-minute window in this launch today. There's a technical issue that comes up. They would have, depending on when they scrub, if they were to scrub, then that would determine when they would target a backup opportunity. But again, so far, all indications suggest that they are in a good position to move forward with the launch of Flight 7 today. You see the vent at the middle of the tower has wrapped up, a good indication that we are closing in on the start of LOX load here on the ship upper stage. T minus 54 minutes, 45 minutes, 54 seconds. So just about 11 minutes from now. weren't tracking any issues, I believe, on Starship. Question from Mauser 58907 asking if we can see ship 34 from there and if it's getting frosty. They say, I'd love for SpaceX to show it being tested during the flight. It's actually not being tested right now, and we just had Lab take a look at the Rocket Ranch camera, which is the one that you can go over to check out on the Lab Padre YouTube channel when testing is underway. But don't worry, you're not missing anything right now. Ship 33 is the star of the show today, along with Booster 14. So we will keep all of our attention focused on here, but you can head on over to Lab Padre's channel and check out the Rocket Ranch view for updates on that. And of course, Lab will post future updates on the progress of that testing. Time now, T minus 47 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. We're just a couple minutes away, less than 2 minutes now until the start of ship LOX load. Now T minus 45 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. And now SpaceX is beginning prop load on its ship upper stage, beginning with liquid oxygen. Time now, T minus 43 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. We are just about 10 seconds away from the start of liquid methane flowing on board the ship upper stage as well. Starting now. Seeing some additional venting there from the tank farm as SpaceX is preparing to start fueling the booster stage here in the next several minutes. Start with first the liquid methane on board the booster, starting at T minus 41 minutes and 24 seconds. That'll be followed by LOX load on the booster at T minus 35 minutes and 28 seconds. Time now, T minus 41 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. And now booster fuel load is underway. Time now T-minus 39 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Just a few minutes away from the start of booster locks, though. If you want to go back to that shot real quick, you can see the frost lines starting to form on the ship upper stage as liquid methane, liquid oxygen have been flowing on board the upper stage now for a few minutes. Also starting to see that liquid methane fuel line on the frost line from that on the booster as well. You look about halfway up the booster. Time now T-minus 35 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. And at this point, the final fueling milestone is now underway. Liquid oxygen is flowing on board the booster stage of this fully integrated Starship rocket. Start to see that frost line form near the base of the super heavy booster. With that, want to bring back in our friend, Mr. Stephen Clark, space reporter over at Ars Technica. Works alongside Eric Berger over at the outlet. Stephen, welcome back. You're just in time to see the Starship really get frosty here.
Yes, happy to be back. And the ship is coming alive. Booster is too.
And we should be getting some views now from SpaceX momentarily. It looks like their webcast is starting, so we'll be working those into our live stream as well. Did want to wait till you were back, Stephen, to bring in one of the questions that we got, since it was specifically directed to you. Put it up on the screen so you can read it, and I'll say it out loud for those who may be visually impaired. For Clark, with the success of New Glenn, what aspirations do you see for Blue Moon this year now?
Yeah, that's a good question. The New Glenn rocket, of course, is going to be the launch vehicle for Blue Origin's Blue Moon lunar lander. And Blue Origin is developing two versions of that vehicle, the lander Blue Moon Mark 1 and 2. Mark 1 is going to be a cargo version of the Blue Moon. Mark 2 will be the crew version, and it will perform much the same function as Starship for NASA as the human landing system. So NASA will have two human-rated lunar landers, from one from SpaceX, one from Blue Origin. And as for what's next for Blue Moon, Blue Origin plans to launch one of the early prototypes for Blue Moon on a test flight to attempt a landing on the moon, potentially before the end of the year. And that will be launching, of course, on the New Glenn rocket, probably several flights from now. And we mentioned earlier in the broadcast that NASA will have some, at least one science payload on the Blue Moon Mark 1 lander when it launches. And that will be the first of many test flights of Blue Moon leading up to its human rating for astronauts.
Great explanation of those two lander variants. Just listening into the start of the broadcast here, things are continuing to move smoothly for SpaceX with its Starship rocket. Taking a nice look at a drone view that's circling the pad right now. The next milestone that we're looking for as far as the fueling is coming up at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. That is the chill of the Raptor engines, both on the ship and the booster stage. So we're at T-minus 31 minutes, 8 seconds, and counting. Want to bring in a question from Gypsy King that may seem somewhat simple on the face of it, but it's good for folks that are not as intimately familiar with the Starship program, Stephen. Not seeing it pop up on the screen, but the question reads, what is the reason for this launch? Is it the hopes of learning something or testing something? And, I'll start and let you pick up the football from where I leave off. But broadly speaking, the Starship program is an iterative development program where SpaceX flies, learns, changes, and tests by flying again. And so each time that they launch one of these Starship flights, they are looking to improve various facets, whether that's the something like the flap design on the forward part of the ship upper stage, the fueling process for either the booster or the ship, the tiles that protect the system as it comes back through the atmosphere, a whole host of things as they're learning towards a both fully reusable version of Starship, as well as one that can support payloads and eventually humans to low Earth orbit and beyond. Stephen, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, Will, you explained it very well. And one thing I'll add, though, is I've heard SpaceX officials describes these Starship test flights with saying that the payload for these test flights is the data. It's not carrying customer satellites or not going off on a mission to the moon with these test flights. These are data gathering and learning exercises. And so the payload is the data, quite literally. That's what the engineers want to get back. And they will learn something inevitably from this flight. Obviously, they want the flight to go well. There are some outcomes that are better than others for all these test flights, but whatever happens, they'll learn something. If it goes very poorly, which I don't expect, they'll learn something that went wrong, a design change that they need to make potentially that will improve the reliability of the next one. And if things go right, then they know what works, and they know that they have a design that is meeting requirements, and they can look at other areas of the vehicle to make improvements.
And it's also not that they're waiting to see exactly what goes right and what goes wrong with each individual one before they start the next flight hardware. As someone asked earlier about the status of Ship 34, they're already in the process of going through tests for the next ship upper stage that will fly in support of Flight 8. The booster for that mission also in work, and so they have quite a bit of hardware that is in flow down there at Starbase that they're working to learn from, and so that learning is extending out pretty far beyond just what is actually actively flying. Take this moment.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Stephen. I was just going to say briefly, want to take this moment to explain we're watching the trajectory animation for the nominal flight plan for Ship 7, Flight 7. But go ahead.
Just agreeing with you, Will. I think you are exactly right. They have many ships, many boosters in undergoing different stages of assembly and test right now at Starbase. One thing I wanted to mention briefly was back last summer, they had the ship after the June test flight, which I believe was Flight 4. They had the ship for Flight 5 already built and nearly ready to fly. And based on what they learned from Flight 4 with the heat shield damage they observed during reentry of the ship, SpaceX engineers decided to beef up and replace the entire heat shield on the subsequent vehicle, and that resulted in a delay of a couple of months to the launch date.
Getting a nice little bit of graphical overlay here as SpaceX commentators talking about the upgrades to the ship that's flying here. Also want to note, and maybe they'll point this out explicitly when they get down to the base of the Super Heavy booster, but in the realm of reuse and getting towards a fully reusable version of Starship, they are in fact reflying one of the Raptor engines that successfully returned to the tower here back during Flight 5. Believe that's number 314 or pie, which actually has a little decal of a slice of pie around it. So look for that to make an appearance at some point during the broadcast. Also, they're highlighting that these are a series of different types of tiles that'll be used as part of an experiment to test a variety of thermal protection systems to bring the ship back as safely as possible. This is some great video here, Stephen. This is our first really good look. I know, obviously, Lab Padre was able to catch this from the ground when they were loading the Starlink demonstrators on board, but this is a nice view at the height as they were being loaded on board. What's kind of your expectation of this first deployment from Starship? This is something that is wholly new that we haven't seen. We saw a test of the payload bay door on, I believe, Flight 3, but this will be the first time that we actually see Starship deploy anything from there.
I'm excited to see. I'm not sure quite what to expect. We've seen animations of the payload deployment that we're seeing now here on SpaceX's stream of the PEZ dispenser, as they've nicknamed it, popping out those satellites one after the other. I'm curious to see how quickly are they really going to fly out of the payload bay that quickly when they deploy, or are they going to be spaced out at a slower speed? Eager to see all of that, and it's one of the things that is entirely new about this flight, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if they have any cameras that are on these simulators. Love to see some views as one of them is egressing the ship. Oh, there you see proof that it is Pi that is reflying from Flight 5 on board this mission here today. SpaceX obviously loves to lay into puns and jokes where it makes sense, and the Pi decal is probably one of my favorites that they've come up with so far. You know, Stephen, given this the first time that a Raptor is being reflown as a part of the fully integrated stack, what are you expecting SpaceX to learn? Well, obviously things to learn from that, but what is your expectation, maybe better question, of the performance of that engine on this flight?
Well, I think SpaceX anticipates that it's going to perform just as it did on its previous flight back in October. This flew on Flight 5, so it flew 2 flights ago when they caught the booster back at Starbase, and just interest. And they're probably just interested to see if it matches their expectations, and not sure I really expect any difference in performance going into a reflight of this engine. It's designed to be reusable. We're probably just testing that.
Indeed. Taking a look at the time, we're currently T-minus 21 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. Just a couple minutes away now from speaking of the Raptor engine chill, beginning at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Quick update from SpaceX. They're about halfway through fueling the booster, about 3/4 on the ship. So things are still moving smoothly. Now T minus 19 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. The Raptor engine chill is underway. Quick question from the Gypsy King asking if this is going to be an orbital flight and reentry or just flying around and then reentry. At this point, SpaceX is just doing suborbital flights with its Starship rocket. Question. Time now T minus 17 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. This view from Lab Padre, who is at the rocket ranch right now. Is a great area to access and place to view Starship flights that is just about as close as you can get. And as long as SpaceX is launching these flights at 4 p.m. in the day, we got the sun in just the right spot to get some great views, whether you're just watching with your own eyeballs or with telephoto lens, binoculars, or the like. Want to give a big tip of the hat to all the folks who manage the Rocket Ranch for allowing us to be present, live stream, bring you these great views from the Rocket Ranch. Just a few miles down the road, due west of the pad here. Now T minus 16 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. Fueling will continue on as it is right now until about T minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds when ship prop load wraps up. That'll be followed 30 seconds thereafter by the booster prop load concluding. Taking a look up on one of the onboard cameras right now, looking up at the grid fins and the aft flap on the ship upper stage. You can also see one of the chopstick arms that'll be used to grab the super heavy booster when it makes its way back towards the launch and landing tower. Time now, T-minus 9 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. As we're less than 10 minutes away, getting close to the point of liftoff, let's go ahead and talk about what we'll be seeing in a nominal flight of Starship Flight 7. Liftoff of the full stack is set to begin at T+2 seconds. About a minute after that, the rocket will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. We'll then hit MECO, which here for a Starship flight is most engines cut off on the Super Heavy booster. Stage separation will happen with that hot staging at T+2 minutes and 40 seconds. That'll be followed by the Super Heavy booster boost back burn startup. T+2 minutes and 46 seconds, with that shutting down less than a minute later. The hot stage ring will be jettisoned at T+3 minutes and 32 seconds. The booster will be transonic at T+6 minutes and 26 seconds. And just backing up for a second, after separation and before they get too far with the booster, SpaceX flight director and the flight team will make a call on whether the tower and the booster are in a good position to attempt a catch. T+6 minutes, 35 seconds, the booster landing burn will start up, assuming a call for the catch is made. The booster landing burn will conclude at T+6 minutes, 55 seconds, with hopefully a catch at the tower just before that 7-minute mark. T+8 minutes, 53 seconds is when the Starship engines cut off on the upper stage. T+17 minutes, 33 seconds is when those Starlink demonstrators will be deployed. About 20 minutes after that is when the in-space relight demo begins. Just a brief burn of one of those Raptor engines on the ship upper stage. Starship will make its entry back towards the Indian Ocean. T+47 minutes and 25 seconds. It'll be transonic, or traveling below the speed of sound, at T+1 hour, 3 minutes and 12 seconds. It'll be subsonic, about a minute and some change after that. It'll perform a landing flip at T+1 hour, 6 minutes and 12 seconds with an exciting landing. T+1 hour, 6 minutes and 38 seconds. And actually, you're seeing some video from SpaceX from Flight 5 and the catch. This is hopefully what we'll be seeing coming up here shortly after liftoff. Stephen, as we're in the final minutes into flight, just want to get your brief thoughts about what we're about to see and your final impressions pre-launch. And we'll come back to you on the other side of liftoff, of course, but before we get down to the final minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm just excited to see another flight of Starship, and SpaceX is about to break its own record for the world's largest rocket by roughly 6 feet or a couple of meters, since this vehicle is a little bit taller than the last one. So a new record will be set. That is a bit of trivia there, but most importantly, interested to see how the Raptor engines perform, the one that's being reflown, as well as the entire set of engines, and the heat shield during the Starship reentry, I think, will be something to watch.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll have some views just like you and I saw on Flight 5. Now, T-minus 5 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. We are almost done with the fueling on the ship upper stage and the Super Heavy booster down below. Ship prop load set to wrap up at T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Let's take a quick update from SpaceX, the status check on the rocket here.
That's super important.
Great
Our
news.
security guys, Mike, Kyle, Nick, the whole team out there in the elements, making sure everything's clear, doing a fantastic job. And we are coming up on 4 minutes and looking good for launch.
Yeah, certainly exciting. Now, we do have an opportunity to hold at T-minus 40 seconds if necessary. This is a chance for us to perform additional checks if necessary. If we need to repressurize some tanks, or if there's a wayward vessel in the range last minute, opportunity to clear it out. But everything currently looking good. Now, once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, a number of events will occur in rapid succession. The ground spin and ignition systems come up to flight pressure. The ship will go to internal power. After that, the quick disconnect, or QD arm lockout, is removed in preparation for retraction, which will happen shortly after T0. And yeah, once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, we do have the ability to recycle the count under certain conditions back to that T-minus 40 second mark and hold there to assess what happened and assess opportunity to proceed again to T0.
Yep, we've used that T-minus 40 hold a couple of times. Boat's usually one of the items, but we aren't tracking anything right now that would cause us to hold there. We can hold there for several minutes. Main thing you're watching at is you kind of set a clocks because your temperatures will change and the fuel in the locks everything pretty quickly. So you've got a couple of minutes that you can hang out and figure things out. There are items that if we pass them, we're scrubbed for the day. One of the main ones is that flame deflector at the bottom of the launch mount. Water begins flowing for that at the T-minus 10 second mark. If we scrub at any point after that, we'll be done for the day. And then teams will need to refill the deflector as well as all of our prop that we use to load on board the vehicle. It's pretty much just under 11 million pounds of prop sitting on that thing right now. And we can actually recycle in about 24 hours now.
Which is incredible given the sheer volume of propellant that is on board the vehicle there on your screen.
Time now, T-minus 1 minute, 53 seconds and counting. The prop load has concluded at this point. We are waiting the SpaceX flight director to give their go for launch. That is the last big box to tick before we are ready to see this Starship fly. That go for launch coming up at T-minus 30 seconds, so 1 minute away. T-minus 1 minute and counting. $40 seconds. $30 seconds. SpaceX has passed through the prop load gate, as they call it. We should be hearing the call that they are go for launch momentarily.
Director Ty Huntington, take it away.
Go for launch.
And we are now just a few seconds away. Here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, engine ignition, 2, 1, and liftoff of Starship on Flight 7. The ascent of Starship on its 7th test flight. It has cleared the tower. Looks like all 33 Raptor engines on the base of the Super Heavy booster are performing as expected, and a good ascent 30 seconds into flight.
All right, we're more than 30 seconds into flight. Telemetry showing 33 out of 33 engines as it's pitching down range.
Now more than a minute into flight. Vehicle passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure. Coming upon a few events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see booster, most engines cut off for MECO. T plus 2 minutes 32 seconds. That'll be followed by a hot staging, and the super heavy booster boost back burn will start at T plus 2 minutes and 46 seconds. Call for max Q. SpaceX launch teams are doing their necessary checks to ensure that the tower is ready to support a catch of the super heavy booster. They'll also be tracking data coming down from the booster itself, and they will make a manual call on whether they're going to be pursuing the catch or not. Less than 20 seconds away to MECO. Some great tracking work by the team here. Coming up on MECO now. There you see MECO. Next will be hot staging. And the boost back burn startup. We're awaiting the call that they are confirmed go for catch. Hot stage jettison coming up here in just a few seconds. That hot stage range should be jettisoned right now. Confirmation they are go for booster return. SpaceX is in fact going to go for the catch today. So for those in the area of South Padre Island, Brownsville, Boca Chica, keep your ears open. You'll hear quite an amazing sonic boom as that booster makes its way back towards the catch tower. Some great views of the release the hot stage ring there. Now a little more than 4 minutes into flight. Coming up next, the super heavy booster will be transonic, or traveling below the speed of sound. With the completion of course, the boost back burn, the landing burn will begin at about T plus 6 minutes and 35 seconds, less than 2 minutes from now. Now a little more than 5 minutes into flight. Great view of the ship upper stage as it continues on with its first burn. If you take a look back at our tracking camera, you can actually still see that hot staging ring. It's the little white dot just beneath the booster there at the top of the frame. Some great views from the boosters onboard cameras. SpaceX said that they had 30 different camera views that are on board the ship and booster with this go around. So expect to see a lot of interesting views that perhaps we have not seen before as the booster makes its way back down in anticipation of the catch. Great view of the booster that's coming back on the tracker. Landing burn set to begin in about 5 seconds. Landing burn underway. Let's listen for the sonic boom. And it looks like a good catch of the Super Heavy booster for the second time. Confirmation by SpaceX that the booster has been caught. Big congratulations to SpaceX for on attempt number 3 and for the second time catching the Super Heavy booster back safely at the tower in the arms of the chopsticks. A great view of the grid fins, the hypersonic grid fins that were controlling the steering. And as the Super Heavy booster has been caught, ship upper stage still soldiers on. On the ship upper stage, meanwhile, they only appear to have one of the Raptor vacuum engines that is still igniting right now. No telemetry data coming in at this point in time either. At this point in the flight, the engine shutdown should have happened, so there shouldn't be any of the Raptor engines still showing as ignited. Might just be an issue with telemetry just coming down, that ship might still be okay, just not receiving good telemetry data at this particular moment. Commentators confirming that they are also waiting to hear the status of ship. One part of this mission appears to have gone exceedingly well, waiting to get the status of the ship upper stage, S-33. Notable, this was the first Block 2 version of the ship upper stage. again, for those who are just joining us, we have seen a successful catch of the Super Heavy booster. You're taking a live look at it right now from our tracking cameras, and now a close-up from Lab Padre's camera. However, we are still awaiting the status of the ship upper stage as the telemetry data froze a little bit into the flight. Let's listen in for a status check.
Have comms with the ship, so trying to figure out exactly when that happened and exactly what happened. So obviously the flight controllers right now going through their data, looking to make sure it's not anything instrumentation on the ship, but actually try and get us a status. So again, we're gonna keep listening in on this. We'll give you an update as soon as we have a little bit more. So for now, stage 1 back in the tower, waiting to find out a little bit more about stage 2.
And there you have an update from SpaceX commentator. As you noted, they have lost communications with the ship upper stage, going back and reviewing the data as they have it right now to determine when that cutoff happened and get some indication of why. Meanwhile, a great view of the engines at the base of the Super Heavy booster that supported this return to landing site operation with a catch, the second for SpaceX out of 3 attempts. Let's listen back in.
We caught a booster, but we are still waiting to find out a little bit more on the ship. So it had successfully separated. We did that hot staging maneuver. We did see all 6 of ship's engines on the way uphill during its ascent. But as we were getting to the end of that ascent burn, we saw engines dropping out on telemetry, and we have since lost contact with the ship. So again, we're still listening in on the loops, trying to figure out how much we can get right now. But again, stick with us. We'll bring you updates as soon as we hear them. Really exciting. We were able to catch the booster today. Obviously, we want to get the ship all the way over to the Indian Ocean. May not be able to do that at this point, but we'll give you some updates as soon as we hear a little bit more about the ship.
For those that didn't catch earlier, this was a new version of the ship. This was its debut flight. So a lot of learnings here for sure as we continue to tune in and listen in with the teams and try to gather more information to understand where we stand with the ship. But as Dan mentioned before, teams are trying to make sure that it's not an instrumentation error. We want to find out if it's, did we just lose communication or did something else happen with the ship? So teams are actively working, trying to figure out what we can find out, and we're continuing to listen in and find out more information to share as we can. But as we said before, and you can see it there on your screen, what a beautiful, beautiful sight to see another booster back at the launch tower. That was successfully caught just minutes ago after sending the ship off into space, and having seen it for the first time with my own eyeballs in person, it was pretty awesome. And yeah, the thunder-like sonic boom was really fun to experience.
Yeah. So we are getting a little bit more. So we did lose all communications with the ship. So I mean, that is essentially telling us that we had an anomaly with that upper stage. So we're just coming up to the end of that ascent burn for the ship when we stopped when we started to lose a couple of the engines. We saw those dropping out, and then we did lose telemetry from the ship. So that means we didn't have contact with it. So at this point, we are assuming that the ship has been lost. So this was a brand new vehicle, essentially. This was kind of an upgrade version. So with that, there's a lot of things you're upgrading, but there's a lot of things you're going to learn as all of those systems are now interacting with each other for the first time. But at this point, we did lose the upper stage of the ship. So again, we're gonna listen in and try and figure out a little bit more about what happened. And obviously, we'll do kind of a full breakdown once we get smarter ourselves in the coming hours and days as well.
For sure. Now,
Now 17 minutes post liftoff, as you've been hearing from the SpaceX commentators, the ship per SpaceX has been lost after they had lost communication. Just reviewing the timeline here, the telemetry data froze at about T plus 8 minutes and 27 seconds with just one of the single outer stage engines showing that it was still lit. Just going back and looking at some of these milestones here, the telemetry data from what was provided by SpaceX on screen showed the loss of a center engine about T plus 7 minutes and 40 seconds. Then you saw another center engine go out at T plus 8 minutes and 3 seconds, an outer engine at 8:04, another outer engine at 8:18, and the last center engine at 8:23 post liftoff. Want to bring in Stephen Clark, space reporter at Ars Technica, back again with us, who's been watching this all unfold with us live. Stephen, it's sort of tale of 2 points of success and 1 point of disappointment. Let's start with where things went right with the catch of the super heavy booster. You know, this also featured the reuse of a refurbished Raptor engine. Still got it supported out there at the tower. Your thoughts on just that part of the mission?
Yeah, well, it was remarkable to see the booster come back and be caught again by the Mechazilla arms at the launch tower. That's 2 for 2 now. When they've tried to actually bring the booster back to Starbase, they've caught it both times. So that's a good feather in SpaceX's cap going forward. They seem to have got that down, so to speak. Probably more still to be tested and demonstrated to gain confidence going forward with the catch. One thing with the booster, a couple things with the booster, I guess I noted, were during the boost back burn, one of the Raptor engines appeared to not be firing, but the engine or telemetry display on SpaceX's webcast during the landing burn showed it firing. So not sure if that was a glitch or hiccup on the telemetry or the webcast, or if one of the engines had failed during the boost back and somehow worked during the landing burn. Interested to see how SpaceX describes that. And then the other thing I noted that I don't remember seeing back in October on the last catch was the booster seemed to be swinging a little bit on the catch arms. I don't remember seeing that back in October, and just interested if if there was something missed, or perhaps it's the wind or something like that, and perhaps it's entirely expected, but I just don't remember seeing it back in October.
Yeah, those are both really good visual catches there. We definitely noticed that it had a little more swing to it this go around. I'm sure that is, as is the case with everything that's happened with this flight, something that SpaceX will certainly be looking at in great detail, especially with the engine as you saw it. Let's turn now to the not so great part of the flight, the apparent loss of the upper stage, as SpaceX is reporting that telemetry data was lost, and by all accounts, the upper stage was lost at some point as well. Obviously, we can't know with any definitive certainty what caused it to go awry, but I guess, remarking on one thing that Kate Tice mentioned in the broadcast remarks is that this is the first Block 2 upgrade of the ship upper stage, and in its first outing, it suffered a similar fate as Block 1. It didn't make it very far, and certainly not all the way to the Indian Ocean, far from it.
Yeah, it was still over the Gulf of Mexico at the time that the telemetry was lost with the ship. So you noted the times. I noted the same times of those various events. You know, T plus 7 minutes and 40 seconds or so when the first engine appeared to shut down, according to the telemetry display on SpaceX's video, followed by more engines shutting down, and then total loss of signal about just short of the 8.5 minute point of the flight. And that was roughly 20 to 25 seconds before the planned engine cutoff, when the ship would have reached its planned trajectory. So whatever happened to the ship, we're at T plus 21 minutes now. I'm guessing it's actually still in flight, the ship or the debris from any sort of mishap, and will be coming down. Have to refer to someone like Jonathan McDowell or somebody to plot out exactly where the debris may fall, but I would guess perhaps the Atlantic Ocean, the eastern South Atlantic, or even Africa. But I'll leave that to someone smarter to determine where the debris may fall from the ship.
I will slightly refute you on the smarter point, maybe just with more refined expertise in this one specific area.
That's fair. I'm actually checking his X feed right now to see if he has any thoughts on it.
While you're doing that, I was just going back